Hello and welcome to the President's Podcast, right here on the record with the Ohio Senate. The views the news excludes. I'm your host, John Fortney. I'm the Director of Communication with the Senate Republican Caucus, the Majority Caucus in the Ohio Senate. Great to have a first-time guest on the President's Podcast this week, State Senator Bill Reineke, Republican from Tiffin, Ohio, in the 26th District. Great to have you on.
Nice to be here.
You know, we want to step back just a few months, but it was really a battle and an initiative that had been years in the making. Senate Bill 1 is really your bill that helped reform, finally, the Department of Education in Ohio, transforming it into the Department of Education and Workforce that also realigned the duties of the state school board. So before you take us back to why that was necessary, do you think that the reforms right now are starting to produce results?
I do. I think the announcements that the governor gave last week in his State of the State concerning one little simple thing about we no longer just programming for their education, but we're also programming for their future and for the jobs that follow. So I think that is that just shows right there that the whole thing is going to work the way we're hoping.
You know, we always, somewhat tongue-in-cheek, talk about the deep state, the bureaucracy, and how difficult it is to get changes done when you're dealing with state agencies. And you see a lot of the coverage, obviously, about what goes on in the federal government. But really, this was a battle, wasn't it? Because I know the president had talked about, well, he would send a letter or he would call over to the Department of Education and basically was told, we don't work for you. And there was really little oversight or teeth even from the governor's office when it came to the Department of Education. So take us back to what you think made the difference and why lawmakers were finally fed up with it.
Well, I had the same experience going back 7-8 years ago when I was in the House. And I'm an auto dealer, came to Columbus thinking the education world works perfectly. But I never really understood the connection between education and business. It's always been awkward. I got involved in this when I started to study the remediation rates. I went over to the ODE, sat down with them, and I still carry a picture of the whiteboard in my pocket just for motivation. But there's 4 pathways out of high school, and most schools follow the ACT, SAT pathway. They don't pay any attention to the student, what I call the student's purpose. So having technicians, trying to get them involved in my businesses and understand the construction business, just every business is looking for employees. How do we get people who really want to get into those fields interested in them early where they can get the proper training so when they come out of school, they're ready for a career. So studying the governor's tasks or the governor's remediation rates, finding out 1 in 4 of our kids are falling through the cracks, it became really important for me to try to figure out why that's happening. So then we understood that there's 2 silos, the career tech world and the K through 12, and they operate independently. One of my favorite budget frustrations is understanding the education budget because it's crazy. It's just bizarre, but they don't correlate with each other. So capacity issue at a school in Penta in Toledo, had a lot of room, but they were building a new school across town at Start High School. So why don't they both know their capacity issues and how can we save the taxpayers' money? And oh, by the way, train these kids so they've got good jobs when they come out.
Results matter. Imagine
results
that,
matter.
right? In the private sector, results matter.
They do.
And in government, the president has said, you know, unfortunately, you can have a lot of bad actors because there's one BWC or there's one state agency that handles this and they're never going out of business. But if you have competition and the potential for going out of business, you want to make sure that you're lean and mean, profitable, and based on a results-oriented strategy.
Correct. The technology is changing so quickly that we have to adapt these situations into our school systems earlier so kids come out, they're ready to go. And the other fallacy is just because they go through career tech that they're no longer interested in higher ed. That's false. I mean, they're the ones that actually do better at higher ed once they're involved in that process.
And don't carry the debt that other kids have. How big of an issue do you think college debt is right now?
I think when you look at, I serve on the governor's task force for workforce, and when you look at how well some of the really good schools do, but yet they still only graduate 60% after 5 years in a college level, we're missing something there from the standpoint of preparing those kids, or at least alerting them to the options that could be available.
You talk about you're an auto dealer. Is there a need? Because if you look at the cars that I drove back in high school, my coveted 3 Z28s, right? The technology has changed the industry. Digital dashboards, everything's digital. There were no computers in cars when I learned how to drive back in 1984. Is there a need for a higher knowledge-based workforce within the service part of the auto industry, and can you make a living doing that?
Yeah, that's a correct explanation of it. If you go back, I made spark plugs in high school, and so to say I should get a job in manufacturing, it's all changed. So the tech world, the construction world, everybody is using more computers. It's highly technical today. So we need to correct the fallacy. We need to correct the stigmatism that goes with those types of jobs that my parents had or that we had, just to change the image of what that is. So part of what we do is we need to involve parents and say, hey, your son or daughter's looking at this career, and this is what they can get out of it, and this is the wage they can make, and oh, by the way, these are the benefits that go with it. And to your point, John, no college debt.
How about that?
Or limited debt. So those are options that we need to be presenting to students and parents.
Well, I know where I grew up in southeast Ohio and also on the eastern half of Ohio. You have the oil and gas industry, the shale and natural gas is such an emerging technology, again, as green energy, as clean energy that powers the grid, right, at an affordable price. And the workers in that field are really needed because you can be 19, 20 years old with a welding certificate and be making $90,000 to $100,000 a year. And you see the guys with the big dually pickup trucks and a big welding unit in the back, in the bed. I mean, they're out there in the field, hands-on. It's hard work, but in 15 or 20 years, these guys are millionaires.
Yeah, and it even goes to women getting into welding, and there's a lot of applications for welding, but that's so true with so many of the other fields that we've got out there.
And this week, during session this week in the Senate Resolution 121, which was sponsored by Senator Michael Ruley, really was a statement in support of the natural gas industry to the Biden administration that seems to want to label it dirty energy, and we need to be alternative energy minded. But we understand that what they call green energy or alternative energy can't power the grid. And so is this something that you would also support? Did you vote in support of it?
Absolutely. I am really concerned about the supply of energy that we have. And I chair the Energy and Public Utilities Committee and have met with PJM, the grid, and different other organizations. And it's amazing how close we are to where we're going to max out, so to speak, or if you graph it, where we're going to hit our climax point. So it's important for us to get into this green energy, or at least understanding that it's okay. It is a green energy. And what really delighted me was that this was a unanimous vote in the Senate.
Yeah.
Both Republicans and Democrats.
Well, again, that was sort of a remarkable thing, too, because I had to say to myself as I was watching, was that a 32-0 vote? There was one member absent. There's 33 members of the Senate, but there were no votes against the resolution.
So we need to let everybody know that we're on huge reserves of natural gas in Ohio, and that's helpful to our situation and other, for us to import it from other countries, those kinds of things. This just makes so much economic sense and sense for us that we'll have power here. So I think that there's a lot to that. The other issue that I think is important with energy is our security, our national security, our security here in Ohio. And I guess as the chairman of this committee, I keep saying, well, how do I approach the normal citizens and saying one's bad or one's good? We need to look at all energy is all good, and all companies are expending lots of money into research to make their form of energy good. So let's take advantage of what we've got, because we need reliability. So I think the first issue we're going to have are big crises when people can't turn their lights on and they're expecting to turn them on,
Yeah,
or the heat in the winter, or something of that situation.
Energy security is national security. Yes. Speaking of national security, a few weeks ago, we held a border security forum with Senator Serino in Independence, Ohio. And thanks for all the views watching on our videos from that. The entire forum can be found on YouTube, on our YouTube channel at Ohio Senate GOP. And it was remarkable what local law enforcement, county sheriffs, local police, mayors, including the Ohio Attorney General Dave Yost was the special guest of that program. And at the local level, the narrative was obvious that there are new levels of organized crime happening in small towns, not just big cities, all tied to the border, not just what a lot of people would think of as, well, we have people coming over from Mexico, but we have men of military age from China. And as Senator Johnson's resolution was talking about this week on Wednesday on the Senate floor, Senate Resolution 241, that border security and condemning China as a driver of crime and undermining the fabric of the country was something that was important enough that the Senate took a 32-0 vote on to send a resolution to the Biden administration urging them to condemn China and secure the border.
Yes, and I support that wholeheartedly. I was really startled when I had the prosecutor from Marion County in my office last week telling me about how this works at the border. Yeah, everybody thinks it happens somewhere else. It's not in my backyard, but in rural America and rural Ohio, where this is happening, we need to pay attention to this, and we've got to get something handled with the border. And then with the idea with the fentanyl coming in and how catastrophic that is for drugs and one-time user, so many bad things can happen. But in the particular case that happened in Marion County, they were telling about how when they visited the cartels, where they align people up, they get people who are maybe not sure what they're doing, but they hire them to drive down to the border and then drive this person up to this particular location. And then the person who's able to get their freedom has an obligation back to the cartel. And that's where it becomes really scary, and what they have to do to secure funds to pay that person back.
And the Attorney General was talking how it's not always just drug crime driven. Some of it's financial crime fraud driven as well, from getting somebody to give over their credit card numbers, or all these very intricate and complex strategies that sends money back to these mob ties overseas. One of the other things, too, that you really have on your plate here in the last year is what happened in East Palestine, Ohio, and you were the chair of the Senate Select Committee on Rail Safety. Of course, you and Senator Ruley work closely together. And we covered, one of the committees that we covered, what I think might have been the final meeting or next to final meeting, actually in East Palestine, where we have a video of that as well. You can find it on our YouTube channel. And you were talking to a business owner whose business was metal fabrication, welding of all types of very hard to weld, complex metal orders, and what that has done to the community. But the commission made some significant reforms in rail safety in the form of wayside detectors. What are those at a basic level?
So wayside detectors are put on the train for kind of an alert system, and when they're traveling at high speeds, the more frequently they have them, the easier for the computer to go off and alert them that there's a problem. So we'd like to make a correction to that. So in our Senate bill, in our rail safety bill, we had a lot of things happen quickly, and all in the effort of safety for any citizen in the state. And a correction that I feel that we need to make is allowing the wayside detectors in a Class 1 or a train that goes less than 10 miles an hour to be exempt from that, because they're going so slow. And the studies by the professionals who sell the equipment say they don't even work at 10 miles or less. So why, let's be practical as well, because this all affects the consumer cost for constituent goods when they pay for transportation. So if we're adding to that cost, The second one would be if they go 25 miles an hour or less, then it goes from the 10 miles to the 25 miles with a 5-mile variance. And so, but the class 3, which is the fast trains and the ones that are traveling all over the state, there's no change.
Like we saw in East Palestine?
Yes, yeah.
Class 3
that
rail.
would not be affected. So I want to make sure everybody understands this is not a safety issue from the standpoint of changing it, but it is an economic issue that we don't want to have disguised as a safety issue.
Smaller rail lines that maybe
Right.
might be looked like more like having a spur or
Correct.
from point A to point B. And you said within a short distance where it doesn't travel more than 10 to 25 miles per hour.
Correct. So if they're 10 miles or less, they're exempt. If they're up to 25, then they space them from every 10 to 25 miles.
Mm-hmm. Well, there's no good deed goes unpunished, the way that works. So you'll probably see some pushback on that. But I think that it's important, though, to say, listen, if you apply standards that are meant for a major operator on smaller operators, they go out of business. Right. And you're driving up everybody's costs.
Well, and I think that's the important part. So we could avoid the subject by camouflaging it as we're affecting safety, but we're not affecting safety, so let's keep our consumer costs down.
Are you satisfied, back to the Select Committee on Rail Safety, are you satisfied with where things are at the end of the day after the very serious accident that happened there? And everybody can Monday morning quarterback what the response was or wasn't, the Biden administration, whether, they should have stepped in immediately like the state of Ohio did. Are you satisfied with the overall recommendations? And did we learn something, you think, from not that disaster, not just that disaster, but from the testimony given and from being on site?
Yes,
do you think that we made progress?
I thought it was a great committee. I thought we had really good involvement. I think there was a couple things that really stood out to me, and Senator Frank Hoagland was one of them that drove this issue, is chain of command. So any other issue that happens around the state, what is the chain of command? So that's not something you can necessarily legislate, but we can go out to all of our communities and all of the meetings I've been speaking at. What is your chain of command if that happens in your town? And who do you call first? Who do you call second? And how does that activate? So then the rail safety issue, the other concerning issue is a lot of it's interstate commerce, and we cannot control that. So we've tried to effectuate some of the changes we wanted with Congress or Senators Brown and Vance. So that machine turns really slowly. So we're trying to keep that motion in gear there, where we can at least have them study train coverings. And then that's another with solid waste coming in that's been pulverized can blow out, or maybe I'm not the expert, but it would seem to me that we should study that. And if there's an issue there with not knowing what's in a train, which we don't know when they travel from one state through our state to another state, let's make sure that they're safe in light of the catastrophe we had up there.
Threading the needle to make safety improvements without stepping on federal laws and regulations. I assume that Tiffin has some pretty significant rail
Yes, we do.
lines, right?
Well, and we have a lot of rails because we have a landfill that's servicing from the East Coast into Ohio.
And trash comes in on the rail line, doesn't it? And you have a bill about that.
We do, and I think that's why it became even more important for me, not to necessarily stop interstate commerce, but to make sure it's safe for our constituents. So the rail coverings is one thing, but more importantly, there is no, in Senate Bill 119, which specifically addresses my county, but I've just received notice that they're trying to move one of these into Marion County, and I understand that possibly in another part of the state with the trains and the business model. I'm not against the business model, but I do believe if a local community wants to have some oversight on to this project or the situation, they should be able to do that. So Senate Bill 119 is no new regulation. It is no new taxes. It does allow a permissive tax to be put on construction and debris, which is what's coming in from the East Coast.
Why are they hauling trash in from the East Coast by rail into Ohio? I mean, what makes the Buckeye State.
We
so
are an attractive state right
I
now.
don't-
We have Intel moving in, we have all these businesses moving in, and we also have our trash moving in because our rates are lower. We're
That's
an
why.
attractive place to do business at the moment. So my major concern, and the reason I would like more oversight, first of all, it's what my constituents have asked for. The second thing is that all of the rest of the state is benefiting from this growth. And I don't think that my state or my area should suffer from negative real estate values due to a problem that we cannot control.
Sure, that's not necessarily the development that everybody wants to see in their backyard. Where does that bill stand right now?
Well, we passed it in the Senate, 30-0, and it's in the House right now, and we have another committee meeting next week. Hopefully, we can educate our committee members over there on why it's important. One of the concerns is if this is a local issue, why can't you handle it locally? Well, we need to change the state code to be able to handle it locally with solid waste districts. And another part of the bill that I need to make sure people understand is if we don't want trash, then we need to figure out recycling, and we need to figure out other options to get rid of this trash in a safe manner.
And I would think one of the things, too, that we see as we talked about East Palestine, some of the smaller, more rural township types of governments, municipal governments, maybe don't have the manpower or the bandwidth or the legal help, and not to mention the budget, to try to tackle some of these large companies that come in and have their eye on a piece of property for an expansion of a landfill or whatever it may be. And that's where the state really needs to step in.
And it's hard for me to come to a committee meeting here in the Capitol and explain what the size of this is. I mean, you almost have to see it yourself, or some way to transfer what that image looks like here. Even a video doesn't really do the size of it justice. So a lot of local communities, to your point, don't have the expertise and don't, I mean, it's hard to organize, and everybody's living their lives every day, and all of a sudden this mountain is huge, and there's an application to double the size of it.
Yeah, it is. You're driving along and suddenly, boom, here is this. Where did that come from? Is that a mountain? Is that a big hillside? Is that part of what the glaciers did? I'm not sure, right? But it definitely can become sort of the sore thumb that's sticking out in many ways. State Senator Bill Reineke, great to have you on the program. Thanks for your time.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you soon.